Hello and welcome to the Agile Innovation Leaders Podcast. I'm Ola Ojako. In this podcast, I speak with world-class leaders and doers about themselves and a variety of topics spanning Agile, lean innovation, business, leadership, and much more, with actionable takeaways for you, the listener. My guest for this episode is Darren Wilmshurst. He is the Director and Head of Consulting at Radtac. Darren is a Skilled Agile Framework Fellow, an achievement realized by less than 30 people globally. He's also an SPCT, that is a Safe Program Consultant Trainer. Darren trained me as an SPC, and I am honored to call him my mentor as well. This episode, be aware, was recorded before the COVID-19 pandemic, so parts of our conversation about travel around the world, conducting a big room planning with all team members physically in the same space might not reflect the current pandemic situation, as people aren't traveling as much, and of course there's social distancing in place, and people are working more remotely than ever. The release of this episode coincides with the 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. Darren and I talked about the Agile Manifesto and, in my opinion, the pearls of wisdom that he shared about applying the values and principles are as valid as ever. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with Darren Wilmshurst. Enjoy. Thank you so much, Darren, for making the time for this conversation.
Real pleasure to join you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Darren, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about yourself?
Oh yeah, that'd be good. I have a probably interesting background because I spent 16 years in retail banking. I was a bank manager, and banking was all good until the 1st of November 1997. Not that I remember the date, but that was the date that the bank decided to automate my job. So some bank managers were really good at lending. Some bank managers were really bad at lending, and they wanted to manage the credit risk to 1% of the portfolio. And they couldn't do that with individual discretion. So on that date, everything was credit scored. If you wanted a overdraft, a personal loan or a mortgage, everything was credit scored. I went from being a bank manager of 9 branches and 140 staff to being a sales manager selling financial products, and not something I really wanted to do. So I made the entirely logical leap from being a bank manager into IT, because that's where my job had gone. So I started off as a business analyst. I did some testing, test management, did project management, and then I joined an outfit called P&O Ferries, and I did a number of head of roles: head of program management, head of development, head of delivery, even did a spellers, head of operations, infrastructure, networks, and that sort of stuff as well. I was just really fortunate to work with some really inspired CIOs during that time who introduced me to Agile probably about 2003, 2004. And I was given the environment to experiment with lots of adoption to patterns and practices as well. Some of them went well, some didn't. We learned loads as well. But I found it was really hard initially. I think we did our first sort of Agile project about 2004. And I'd gone away and read a book and gone to a conference and got inspired by this new way of working. When I came back to the office, and my colleagues had read a different book, gone online, looked at different stuff, and we ended up in almost like these agile wars, where we're arguing about whether we ought to call it a sprint, an iteration, an increment, a time box. And so I got really fed up with that. So I got an outfit called Radtac in to help me, a guy called Peter Measy, and just look, I just need to help to get to a common foundation. And the first thing we did was just an education event where we got all the guys in the room to look, this is the way we're going to work. This is what we're going to call stuff. We're going to at least get a common taxonomy in terms of what we mean by these things. And that made a difference as well. Then, implementing was still hard. So again, got Radtac in to help with some of the practices and help refine those as well. And then I got to a point, I don't know, about 7 years ago, where I'd spent almost 30 years in the corporate world and just wanted to do something a bit different, wanted to go and explore my passion a bit more, not about Agile, but more about trying to make organizations more effective. And funny enough, I spoke to Peter Measy again at Radtac and joined them back in 2012 as a director and to grow their consultancy practice. So I went from the corporate world to the dark side of consulting. That was quite a change for me personally. I'd lived 25 minutes from my work, and that was from the time I left my house to the time I had a coffee on my desk in my office. And now suddenly I was traveling all around the country, all around the world, and my children were quite young, they're 11, 13, and that was quite hard. And the first 6 months, I wasn't quite sure this was for me, but I just wanted to explore that passion. So that change was hard for me. And then I think I was working with a client down in Bristol, and they started talking about this thing called SAFE and this guy called Dean Leffingwell, and I hadn't really heard much about it, didn't know what it was as well. And then almost coincidentally, I heard that Dean was running an SBC course in London in October 2013. And I thought, okay, I'll go to that. So I went to that course. I was not convinced. I always remember Dean talking about this 2-day PI planning event. And he said, we get everybody in the room together. And I said, what, everybody? And he looked at me quizzically, he goes, yes, everybody. That's what? Everybody. Well, just the developers, no, the developers, the Scrum Master, product owners, all the coordinating level, all the program level. So everybody in the room together. He goes, yes. He said, for 2 days. So 2 days. I was thinking, you'll never get that. You're the conversations that you'll need to have in order to get 2 days to where people get together for planning, I thought would never happen. So I sort of remained skeptical. I started running some training courses in 2014, but the interest in the UK was quite low, to be honest. 2015, first half, much the same. And then I think towards the end of 2015, people were saying, actually, I'm really interested in this SAFE stuff. So we did more training courses. And then I did my first launch. And that's when my skepticism turns into, oh my God, this is an amazing event. Because, getting all those people in the room together where you create those social bonds, that networking, that alignment, and where you can resolve difficult problems together is huge. So I became an advocate, so much so that I got asked to join the SAFE program, consultant trainer program.
Can I ask you a question about this? Because you said you were skeptical about bringing everybody in the room for 2 days. How did you get to convince your first client to do that? How was it for you?
I think I was lucky because my first client came on one of my public courses. I think it was like April. There's a delegation of about 4 of them. And they said, we love this. We want to do it. And they said, we're going to start small. We're not going to start with, massive teams. I think we started with 4 teams. So just on the tipping point, really. Just say, we want to prove it out. So I only started with 4 teams, and 2 teams were in India and 2 teams were in the UK. So my first one was distributed, which was fine. But so I think for them, it was like they were sold on it and they wanted to start small. I think it was easier for me in terms of they were already bought into it and they wanted to run it. And it was smaller teams make it an interesting first planning event. But, we had some issues running it distributed. I think it should have taken 2.5 days. It ended up taking 3.5 days.
Oh, okay. Well, it was the first, wasn't it? And
So I think the issues with that one was, I think there was a couple of things. First of all, because of my first distributed one, I think there's some real red lines for me when we're trying to do distributed planning. Number one, you need to have a co-facilitator in each location. Right. I didn't. I was in the UK. I wasn't in India. And it was all new to them, and they really struggled as well. Secondly, we tried to do what I call asynchronous planning. So in the morning, we did all the briefings. We got to lunchtime, and then we started out, in the UK, we started our draft plan in the afternoon, by which time India had gone home. So they came back in the morning, and they did their draft plans, and then we tried to bring them together. It just didn't work. I mean, the whole point of the planning is to understand the tensions and the dependencies between the teams. And of course, if we're doing that asynchronously, so not only weren't sure on what they were doing, when we tried to bring the draft plan together, they didn't work. So effectively, we lost that first round of planning. So we said, okay, well, we need to find a way of overlapping. So on day 3, the UK guys came in a lot earlier, and we asked the guys to stay a little bit later. So we shared the pain, and then we got to overlap, and we got our plans together. But we effectively lost that first round of planning because it was no support and it wasn't synchronous.
So on the 3rd day, did you manage to find someone who would facilitate on your behalf in India, or you still had to do that yourself?
Yeah, I did that myself, but I said to the guys out there, look, if you need help, we had video links and stuff like that. So I'm more than happy to do that. And also, I recognised where they were struggling. So part of the preparation for day 3 was, guys, you need to do these things for me. So these are. If you struggle with that, just give me a call, give me a shout on the video, and I'll go through that with you separately as well. The second PI planning, we made sure that we had facilitators in both locations, really important.
That's quite interesting. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go back a bit to the point where your tipping point, you said after about 30 years in industry and you wanted a change, which was when you made the leap into consulting. There might be some people listening who are considering making that same leap. So what made you decide to go for it? And what was the last straw that broke the camel's back, if there was any such thing?
I don't think it was a midlife crisis. I wanted to do a new challenge, and it was at that time in my life, but if I wasn't going to do it now, it would never happen as well. I think I'd gone through, so many organizational reorganizations and restructuring, but I couldn't face another one of those well. If I'm going to make the break, this is the time to do it as well. And I had the opportunity with Radtac to join them and help grow that particular organisation as well. So I think it was a lining of moons. I needed a change. I spent 30 years in the corporate world. Didn't want to go through another reorganisation, and this opportunity presents itself and say, okay, well, let's give it a go and see how it goes.
Would you say there was an element of, wanting to be a bit more in control of your destiny and not just being at the whim of maybe reorganizations that tend to happen in large organizations, more of having some sort of direct say in the direction of things with your career?
Probably not, I think, because, again, I was a very senior manager at P&O Ferries, so I reported board director, I did meetings, I helped shape a lot of the restructuring that happened within P&O as well. So I had a lot of influence and with that organisation. I just think it was just about really just exploring passion and just trying to do something different. I always felt there's one more thing left in me, and I thought this was it. Okay.
You said your children were young, and the first 6 months we weren't sure in consulting whether it was for you. So what made you change your mind? It's definitely evident that you're doing something you're passionate about. What made you now decide, right, it is for me?
Again, my children were like 11 and 13. Both of them were swimmers and serious swimmers. My son was a national swimmer. He was training about 17 hours a week. So that's 4 mornings at 5 o'clock in the morning and evenings as well. So again, my wife was still working at the time as well. So it was just, and again, with me being away a lot, not knowing when I'd be home and traveling, that was the bit that was difficult, because at least at P&O, I know what time I left for work. I generally know what time I got home. I could be quite predictable. My work was less predictable. So we had a long conversation, and my wife decided to temporarily give up her job. She's a teacher, in order to support me and the children as well. That was the life-changing decision that we had to make as a family. So I'm really grateful for my wife saying, look, okay, I'll take a little sabbatical, get through this, and we try and get some normality back into our lives as well.
It's really refreshing to hear these, because it almost seems like, looking outwardly, everyone has it all. You can have it all. You have to make some sacrifices and compromises to be able to achieve goals.
It's a good question, because again, a lot of people say to me, I'd love to become a consultant. And I talk to them about that. Well, you need to recognize that, you could be anywhere. What's your flexibility in terms of, I could be in the UK, I could be overseas. If it's on a Monday, I'm probably flying on a Saturday or Sunday to get to locations. So I'm there on Monday morning as well. It sounds so glamorous that, I travel the world and people see, that you're traveling all the time. But funny story was, I was due to go out to Dubai. And my wife was teaching at the time, and it was the last week of the school term. And my wife's going to finish on the Thursday, and I was going out to Dubai the following Monday. So I texted her at work and said, look, I'm going to Dubai next week. Do you fancy coming with me? And she texted back and said, no, I'd rather have a new oven. Okay, a bit odd. About 15 minutes later, she gets back and goes, no, I'm coming. She came home with me and I said, what happened there? She goes, I was in the staff room and I've got your text, and I laughed. And people said, what's that? So my husband wants to know if I want to go to Dubai next week. And they said, what did you say? She said, I'd rather have a new oven. And they looked at me, are you mad? And she goes, yeah, I am. But she came with me. So we flew out on the Monday. We arrived in the afternoon. I went into the office Monday afternoon, because I was doing a 2-day training event, just to check the office. And then I got up at 7. I was in the office at 8. Again, I forget how many hours ahead by 3 or 4 hours behind. So it was like quite early in the morning. So I trained from 8 till 6. I got home in the hotel, and Joe goes, wow, is that what you do? Yeah. So you got really early in the office, you trained all day. I said, what would you do now? I said, well, now I'd go and have a meal for one in a restaurant. I'd come back to my room, I'd do my emails, and I'd go to bed. And I'd do exactly the same tomorrow. And she goes, oh, okay. Do you fancy going to the Burj Khalifa? She said, I know you're tired. I said, no, I will, because it'll be good to get out.
Yeah.
And I got the following morning, did exactly the same, finished at 6, got home, packed my bag, had a meal, went to the airport, flew home. She goes, and that's what you do. I said, exactly what I do. It looks glamorous, but it's literally planes, hotels, office. I hate eating on my own. If I'm on my own, I'm not a great explorer either. So I know some of my colleagues are really good at going out and seeing the sights. I'm not. So, and if you're training all day, you've still got other responsibilities that you need to catch up with as well. So
sure, I can imagine as the head of consulting, it's not just the training. You still have to attend to other official and admin type things. Yeah.
The director of the company that have to do stuff like that.
Oh, wow. I get the impression you are someone who's always out to learn, to improve yourself, so you're not resting on your oars. Even though you are at this level, have you at any point in time felt like, I think I've learned enough?
No, it's always the reverse. I was never a reader. I was always a numbers person. So I went to university to study maths. I was one of those kids at primary school where you'd be given a book at the beginning of the week to go away and read it. So I'd get to the end of the week, I'd hand back my book to Miss, and she goes, "Have you read the book, Darren?" And I go, "Yes, Miss, I hadn't." And she'd give me the next book. And I'd go, I was just never a great reader. It wasn't what I do. I probably, over the last 6 years now, I've read more than I've ever read. And even so now that when I go on holiday, my daughter berates me because, I don't take fiction books on holiday or biography books. I take business books on holiday.
I do that too. I do that as well. Yeah.
And I've got a picture of my daughter took a picture of me literally sitting on a lilo in a pool reading a business book. She goes, "What are you doing?" And every time I go on a course, someone will always recommend a new book that I haven't read. So I have a backlog of books that I still need to buy and read as well. And there's a couple of books I'm rereading at the moment because some of my colleagues are good at the audio books. I need to see it. I'm a real visual reader.
Oh, okay. And
I'm getting down. I'm just highlighting, the bits that I care. Here's a nugget as well, so I can flick through that book and use those quotes, those anecdotes as part of the training that I do as well. So
okay. So when you mean visual, would an Amazon Kindle do for you, or no? It has to be like a physical. All right. Okay.
I'm old-fashioned. I need to, and I can mark it up.
Each to their own. I mean, I do a blend. I like physical books, and given that I tend to commute a bit as well, listening to audiobooks. But yeah, I've learned to blend all of them in depending on where I find myself. If you were to gift a book to someone who's aspiring to develop as a lean agile professional, which one or two would you gift to the person or recommend to the person?
So it's interesting because part of being on the road a lot is you sometimes just don't get a chance to take time out and reflect and write. And I'm a bit frustrated at the moment that I haven't written a blog for a while and stuff like that. So at the end of April, I'm going to do like a little mini retreat. I'm going off to Finland with Verpi, who's a fellow SPCT, and we're going to have a little safe retreat. And I'm going to go away and write a couple of blogs and stuff like that as well. And one of the blogs I want to write is top 3 books, top 3 videos, top 3 white papers. I think I'm almost there. One is Tribal Unity by N. Campbell Pretty. It's about how to get to high-performing teams, get them self-organising. It's a short book, so it's a really good read. Leading Change by Cotter. I think that's just so critical. I think he wrote the book in 1995. I might have got that wrong. But he's rewritten the preface because he's saying, this book was written over 20 years ago. It's still relevant now. He finds it amazing that the same challenges are still appearing now, even though that people haven't learned from 20 years ago. And I think my favourite book of last year was the DevOps Handbook by J.S. Humble and et al. And that was interesting for me because for 2 reasons. One, it's quite a thick book. It's not a small book. So it's quite daunting to look at it. And also you think, I'm not particularly technical, but someone really encouraged me to say, no, read it. And actually read it in small batches. Read 25 pages a day. What a good idea. And what I found was that there was so much goodness in there in terms of, there's some technical stuff that you can skim over, but in terms of how to adopt it, some real stories about organizations that have done this as well. And for me, understanding actually it's just not about automation. There's so much other stuff that you need to do in terms of re-architecting and telemetry and stuff like that as well. For me, that was my book of the next year. And if we're going to get to organizations where they need to be more responsive and they need to get their products to market quicker, they need to find a way to be able to do that without relying on very slow, manual downstream processes and practices.
We're going to put the links to them in the show notes. And it's worth mentioning as well, you're a co-author of the BCS Agile Foundations book.
I think it was the BTS approached us to run, so effectively an agnostic Agile Foundations course. We created the course and the exam materials for that. And then they said, well, can you create a companion book for it as well? At Radtac, as a small group of 3 to 9 people, as we were at the time, we wrote a book together. And again, we tried to follow our Agile principles. So we had a Trello board and we agreed, we broke it down into chapters and then into sections, and then who wrote each of those sections. And it was an enlightening experience to do that. I was quite privileged to be one of the co-authors of that as well. I reviewed a book on financial management, Agile financial management as well, which is quite cool as well. Again, that was done in an Agile way. It's in a chapter out every 2 weeks, and we're sprinting every 2 weeks to do that as well. And also I'm one of the accredited contributors to the Safe Reference Guide as well, which I'm really proud of as well.
Well, your last response actually nicely segues into the second part of this conversation, which is to talk about 1 or 2 lean agile related topics. You said the importance of applying agile ways to businesses to make sure that they are delivering value to customers in the shortest possible lead time, on a consistent and predictable basis. Could you elaborate on that? Why is it important in this day and age for businesses to be agile?
I think for me now, we're seeing a lot of digital disruption. The one everyone talks about is Blockbuster. That's an old story now. I think Netflix came knocking on their door over 10 years ago and said, look, you've got a great high street presence. We've got this idea about streaming videos online. Do you fancy buying us for some silly amount of money, really small amount of money? And Blockbuster said, no, we're okay. We're doing great in the high street. The broadband speeds won't be big enough to stream videos. That will never work. We're fine. Netflix came back a year later and said, look, this looks like it's really taken off. Do you want to buy us? They said, no, we're still good. And Netflix, well, amazing. Blockbuster's not around anymore. But I've had probably 2-3 more recent examples of digital disruption. HMV, they stayed off bankruptcy 5 years ago. Someone bailed them out. It looks like they're going to fold again. And they went onto the high street and said, well, why don't you go into HMV and buy videos and CDs? And the answer was, well, we stream it or we download it. We don't need to do this anymore. My daughter's just doing A-levels at the moment, and she's going to go off with some friends to Magaluf as girlfriends to do that, much to my horror.
Oh, well, bank of daddy.
No, she's paying for it herself.
Okay. Oh, good.
But she went to a travel agent. She went onto a well-known high street travel agent and said, we want to go here. This is what we want to do and stuff like that. And they said, that's going to be about £750 per person. She said, oh, thank you very much. She came home, good girl, went online, on the beach, got exactly the same deal, same hotel, same flights, all inclusive, plus airport transfers, which wasn't included, plus some club tickets for £350 per person.
Wow.
And then the final one is that we're thinking about selling our house. We moved about 9 years ago. So last time we moved, so we've got to go around to value our house, stuff like that. And I said, okay, and what's your fees? Expect him to say, it's about 2% plus VAT. And then we get into that haggling situation where I try and beat him down, and we're now at 1.75. And he said to me, it's 1%, Darren. I said, sorry? I said, well, that means then argue. He goes, yeah. I said, why is it 1%? He goes, purple bricks.
Ooh.
So, I think, what we get into a situation where, there's a lot of digital disruption, and these guys are firing up stuff much, much quicker. We need to be able to get our market, our products and our services to market faster. And also to get that feedback. We don't want to create, work on a great product for 3 or 4 years, get to the market and find out that it's not required, or the people won't buy it, or someone else has already delivered it as well. So we need to find a way of having a hypothesis about our product or services and testing it and getting feedback on it as quickly as possible, and potentially as well getting the value as soon as possible before someone else does well. So it's all about for me, it's about that empirical process of making our work transparent, getting inspected. If it's okay, we carry on. If not, we pivot without mercy or guilt. And having that short feedback cycle trying to short that feedback cycle as much as we can.
Am I right in the understanding that the feedback cycle would include the customer as early as possible in the process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In most organizations, that might be a proxy for the customer, but if we can actually use the real customer, then so much the better, because that's the real acid test of, would you use this? Would you buy this? What would you pay for it? Am I doing the right thing?
Very interesting. The International Consortium for Agile, they said there's a difference between being agile and doing agile. In your view, which one should come first?
I think there is a difference. I go into organizations and say, Darren, we're using Jira, so we must be agile. And I go, well, okay, it's a tool. There are lots of tools out there that can help. but I'm not sure entitled to call yourself Agile. Okay, well, Darren, we're doing this practice of doing a stand-up every day. So that's, well, okay, that's a practice. And some of those practices will certainly help you in terms of ways of working. But for me, and I think those things, though, when we talk about doing Agile, the tooling and the practices, I think there are starting points. They're very visible because you can see those things, you see that tooling, you see those practices. But in terms of being Agile or adopting Agile, they're less powerful. For me, the values, the principles, and the mindsets, which are less visible, are more powerful in terms of the overall adoption as well. I've seen too many people that just use the tooling and feel like they're just cranking the handle with the practices, really understanding why they're doing it. So they're doing it, not being it. I think it's not a case of one or the other. I think the two need to go hand in hand, but you need to explain, okay, these are great ways of helping you in your ways of working, but you need to understand some of the other things that need to go with that, the values and the principles and the mindset changes as well.
Okay, and when you talk about the values, the principles, are you referring back to the one that originated from the Agile Manifesto or in 2001, or is there any other?
I think you're right. When I started out, probably they were the ones I used to reference the most, and they're written in 2001. They're still relevant today. I wish they would just turn off some of the software language a bit more, and I think it's much more applicable to the wider organisation, not just software development. I recognise that these guys came from the software industry as well, so I get that, but it'd be nice to do that as well. No, it's the other ones is I suppose for me, I'm a big fan of the SAFE principles, and when I go in now to execs, I don't necessarily talk about Agile, because again, a lot of them will have a preconception of what they think it is or what they've heard. So I talk about the principles that we need to base our decisions on economics. And they go, yeah, we do. So all our investment decisions ought to be economic-led. We need to think about the whole system end-to-end, system thinking rather than sub-optimizing individuals or teams or departments, because that can sub-optimize the whole system. So we need to think about system thinking as well. We're working in a very complex environment, so we can't assume that we know everything up front. So we need to assume variability and some way preserve options, but there's a cost to doing that as well. And we don't want to have too much work in our system. We need to make sure that that we've got good flow through our system. By putting too much work into our system, it clogs it all up. Yeah. So we need to do that as well. And then we'll talk about that we still need to plan. So we need an arrangement if we're working at scale, then how we do that. So we need a sort of big room planning event. We need to make sure that we invest a huge amount of money and time into our people. And we need to make sure that we find a way that they are sufficiently motivated. They have enough purpose, autonomy and mastery in their job that they go, this is a great place to work. I don't want to go anywhere else as well. And part of that comes with empowering them and decentralizing control so that people that have the information can make the decisions. So that's the sort of narrative that I have. And that's very much aligned to those SAFE principles that you and I did last December.
Yes. This segues nicely into my next question. So you said when you speak to executives and I would assume large scale enterprises about SAFE, you talk about the value and the principles. Now, even in the name SAFE, which is Scaled Agile Framework, it's more about applying agile principles and methodologies and tools at scale. Yeah. The question now comes, or some people might have the question, so can a small enterprise apply SAFE?
Can you describe what do you mean by a small enterprise?
An organization that has up to maybe tens or hundreds of employees and would not have as large a scale of operations as multinationals.
I think the key thing is what we need to consider is that we're moving away from a project-based organization to a value stream-based organization. So in the old world, again, my heritage was again project program management when I first joined B&O. But those are temporary organisations, so and we fund them accordingly as well. And that's a bit of a nightmare for me as well, because trying to understand how much money we need for a project is difficult to work out. Most projects of that traditional era tend to be over budget by almost 200%. I think Standard Report, last one was about 188% over budget over time as well. So that's always difficult as well. And then you're trying to manage multiple projects at the same time. And if a project's late, when you're trying to start this project over here, but you've got people over here that need to be over here. So you end up with this constant trying to align your people to the right project all the time. So all I found I was doing with project was I was constantly trying to move the people to the work, and all the time doing that all the time, just shuffling around all the time. And the amount of task switching, the overhead, trying to do that as well was difficult. But project would be late, trying to get the funding was always difficult. So we moved to a much more value stream based, where we actually, what we're going to do, we're going to create stable teams, and we're going to align our teams to a product or a service. So there'll be long-lived teams. And effectively what we do is fund that team, which is perpetually the capital cost of those people. And all that we have to do is we bring the work to the people rather than the other way around. And all I have to do, or I have to coach, is how to prioritize that work. And it's much easier prioritizing that work than anything else as well. That's a long prelude to the answer.
No,
so
it's useful. It is useful.
So first of all, though, so we're going to align teams to our products. Now, if we've got a product that only requires, 3 to 9 people, then we don't need a scaling framework. Actually, if we've got 2 or 3 teams all working on the same product, then probably we don't need scaling framework. There's probably tools and techniques that we can take to SAFe, but they can probably find a way to collaborate and align without a formal framework. The tipping point is once you get to 35 teams all working on the same thing, how do we make sure that they can collaborate and align and are going in the same direction? And I think for me, that's the tipping point. It's not so much the size of the organization. Have we got at least 5 teams all working on the same thing, a product or service that requires alignment? That's the tipping point for SAFe as well. So it doesn't have to be, a large organization or a small, that's the tipping point. And then what I sometimes see is that, okay, well, we've got 10 teams. We're going to use SAFe to help coordinate them, but they're all working on different things. If we're all working on different things, just have, individual teams working on those individual projects. You don't need to coordinate them. If there's no coupling or no dependency to them, why would you want to do that? And I sometimes see organizations using SAFe as a framework for organizational design. It's not. It's a framework to get alignment across multiple teams all working on the same value stream.
That's nicely put, and I believe it would clarify the false notion for some people in terms of using SAFe for uses that it wasn't intended for, and it's more about delivering value and creating alignment across all levels in an enterprise. Radtac is a lean company from what I could see of the organization. However, you guys are, for the size of your company, you are making a lot of impact in this sector. What would you say is your secret?
That's a great question. I suppose it's you're only as good as your last engagement. I'd like to think that actually it's our reputation that precedes us as well. And a lot of work comes to us. We don't go to it. We don't have a sort of a business development function, because most of the work will come to us through our reputation. So I think if we try and live by our own values, and both in terms of how we run our company and how we work with other engagements, we try and deliver agile in an agile way. And if we're not adding value to our own organization, then we don't need to be there anymore as well. And also the fact that we have a really odd business model in terms of my role in organizations to make myself redundant in the organization, because I need to make sure that I transfer the capability and knowledge to organization, because the last thing I want to be is their agile crutch where, if I walk away, it all falls over. So I think that's probably unusual for organizations that said, no, I have a business model to make myself redundant. I have a business model to work in small batches. I have a business model to try and create value. If I'm not creating value, then I won't be here anymore. And I think that really resonates with organizations. And most of our business comes through referrals or direct recommendation as well. So, I don't know if that's the secret, but it feels like it's working.
It does say a lot, because I have worked in consulting as well a while ago, and it's not what the impression I have of the consulting industry, which is more about, find more work, make yourself indispensable, weave yourself into, the client's organization such that they can't do without you. So it's liberating to see a different approach where your aim is to empower the organization to get on and continue without you. And it seems to be.
I think you're right. Yeah, it's almost the opposite. I don't want to make myself indefensible. I want to be able to walk and allow them to grow and explore themselves as well. But I find that the clients that I started working out with in September 2012, still come back and say, look, Darren, we tried, this didn't work. So I go back down and do some a check or audit check or health check, and I say, okay, we'll try this and try that. So I'm really privileged that over the last 7 years, not only worked with some great companies, but worked with some really great people that even though I would say they were clients, they're friends as well. So
No, that's fantastic. And which brings me to, in terms of delivering client work, what I'm getting from you is that it's also important to cultivate good working relationships with them, because it's not just about the work, it's about, the people, or trying to understand them and making sure you're adapting yourself to them and making the whole engagement work for them on their terms.
You and I were both on the other side of the fence. We worked in that corporate world. I worked with lots of third parties and stuff like that as well. And you bought their capability, but you bought the people. People buy people. And for me, that relationship with my client is really important as well. It needs to be open. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be honest. And sometimes you have difficult conversations as well. But for me, it's people by people at the end of the day.
Thank you. That's something I definitely take to heart. So a few more things then, just to wrap up. Do you have any ask of the audience? How can they get in touch with you if they want to say hello? And
I always say that the most easiest way to get hold of me is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I used to say there's only one Darren Wilmshurst on LinkedIn. I'm not entirely sure that's true anymore, but there's only 2 or 3 of us anyway.
Okay.
So Darren Wilmshurst LinkedIn, just connect with me. That would be really good. If you've got any feedback on this today, that'd be great. Any questions, do that as well. Just ping me on LinkedIn as well. If it gets too complicated, I might revert to emails. That might be easier sometimes. But yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to be most active. So that's where I tend to publish my blogs and stuff like that as well.
Okay. So. No, fantastic. So you're not on Twitter or any other social media?
I am on Twitter. I'm not I don't know, it's my age. I don't tweet as much, but I'm Dazza Wilmshurst, at Dazza Wilmshurst. But generally speaking, if I put it on LinkedIn, I will publish it through to, I think you've got an option to publish it straight through to Twitter as well. So I tend to use Twitter to follow my other passion, which is Arsenal. So
okay.
Oh yeah, so that's been.
Well, there might be other Arsenal fans listening. You never know. Well,
yeah. Well, that might just turn them all off now.
Well, we wouldn't know until we start seeing that. So we will put these in the links in the show notes. So thank you for that. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you and learning from you as usual. And thank you so much for making the time.
And thanks for inviting me. It's been great chatting to you this morning as well. And thanks for coming on my course last year as well. It's great having you on the course as well.
Oh, well, that was one of the best decisions I made last year. So thank you. That's all we have for now. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, do subscribe at www.agileinnovationleaders.com. That's agileinnovationleaders.com, or your favorite podcast provider. Also share with friends and do leave a review on iTunes. This would help others find this show. I'd also love to hear from you, so please drop me an email at ola@agileinnovationleaders.com. Take care and God bless.